January 14, 1942. 10:12 a.m. The Oval Office, Washington, D.C. A cold wind presses against the frost-rimmed windows of the White House. The winter light is thin, barely filtering through the curtains, leaving the room in a muted gray. A fire crackles in the small hearth, but it does little to cut the chill settling over the building. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt sits behind the resolute desk, a stack of naval reports spread before him. His cigarette holder tilts gently between his fingers, the thin ribbon of smoke curling into the air. He has grown used to grim documents, casualty lists, convoy alerts, telegrams from Churchill, but the folder delivered this morning carries a weight unlike the others. A knock. Navy Secretary Frank Knox steps inside. He removes his hat slowly, almost ceremonially, as if entering a funeral parlor. Roosevelt watches him for a moment. He already senses what this visit means. Ever since Pearl Harbor, every unexpected entrance brings with it the possibility of new disaster. Knox lays a thin, unassuming file on the desk. "Mr. President, it started." Roosevelt's eyebrows rise slightly, but enough. He inhales, then sets the cigarette holder down beside his papers. Knox opens the file. Inside are reports from the U.S. Navy's Eastern Sea frontier. Half-sunk tankers, burning merchant ships, rescue operations scrambling in the frigid Atlantic waters just miles from American beaches. Roosevelt leans forward. He reads the first line. "Nornis torpedoed off Montauk Point, flames visible from the shoreline." He reads the next. "City of Atlanta sunk, 43 crew missing." Then another. "U-boat activity confirmed within sight of Cape Hatteras lighthouses." The numbers worsen with each paragraph. Tonnage lost, ships gone without distress calls, survivors describing periscopes gliding through moonlit waves only a few miles from America's eastern cities. Knox finally says it plainly. "German U-boats are hunting along our coast, boldly, openly, like it's their sea, not ours." The room falls eerily silent. Outside, Washington continues its wartime bustle, secretaries typing, officers rushing through corridors, radio broadcasts droning with patriotic confidence. But here, in this moment, the President of the United States confronts a terrifying truth. The war has reached America's front yard. The Atlantic is no longer a barrier, it is an open door. And the enemy has stepped through. Roosevelt closes the folder. His jaw tightens. The glow from the fireplace flickers across his face, casting deep shadows beneath his eyes. He knows the question forming in every military mind. How could this be happening, so close, so fast, so easily? And he knows he must decide. What will the United States do now? To understand the shock Roosevelt feels in that January morning, one must step back months, even years, into the long, uneasy prelude that led German submarines to America's doorstep. The Atlantic, by late 1941, has already become the deadliest battlefield on Earth. Britain is fighting for survival. Germany is desperate to choke off its lifelines. When war erupts in Europe in 1939, Hitler unleashes the Kriegsmarine's U-boat arm with a simple directive: strangle British shipping until the island collapses. The strategy is old, blockade, but the tools are new: wolf packs, radio-coordinated attacks, stealth beneath the waves. By mid-1941, British losses soar. Winston Churchill later admits, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." But the United States, still officially neutral, edges closer and closer to the conflict. Roosevelt authorizes the Lend-Lease Act, sending weapons, food, and supplies to Britain. American destroyers begin escorting convoys in the western Atlantic. Encounters with German subs grow tense, sometimes lethal. In September 1941, The destroyer USS Greer exchanges fire with U-652. In October, USS Kearney is torpedoed. 2 weeks later, USS Reuben James is sunk with heavy loss of life. The war at sea is no longer distant. It is brushing against American forces. Hitler notices. When Germany declares war on the United States on December 11, 1941, Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, does not hesitate. He launches Operation Paukenschlag, Drumbeat, a bold submarine offensive against the newly entered United States. But the Germans expect serious resistance. They expect coastal convoys. They expect blackout conditions. They expect radar-equipped patrol aircraft. What they find instead shocks them. The American East Coast, stretching from Maine to Florida, is illuminated like a festival. Cities glow with nightlife, lighthouses beam uninterrupted, and merchant ships sail outlined by the bright shoreline behind them. Many vessels lack radios, sonar, or armed escorts. Some still operate on peacetime schedules, unaware that U-boats have slipped into their lanes. German submarine commanders stare in disbelief through their periscopes. They call it the Great American Turkey Shoot. Meanwhile, in Washington, competing priorities cloud the strategic picture. War planners are focused on rebuilding the Pacific Fleet after Pearl Harbor. Army leaders push for immediate reinforcement of the Philippines. The administration is overwhelmed with demands from every theater. And so the eastern seaboard, home to major ports, oil tankers, and vital shipping lanes, remains shockingly vulnerable. The stage is set. The U-boats are in position. American ships, unaware of the danger, continue to move along predictable coastal routes. By the time Roosevelt receives Knox's report, the attack is no longer beginning. It is already underway. And the losses are mounting at a rate almost no one in Washington has yet grasped. The Oval Office remains quiet, except for the faint ticking of the mantel clock and the distant hum of telephones in the West Wing. Roosevelt keeps his gaze fixed on the last page of the report, names of ships he has never heard of, crews he will never meet, families who will soon receive telegrams. He exhales slowly. Then he speaks. His voice is calm, measured, habitually presidential, but those who know him can detect the steel hardening beneath it. So they are here. Knox nods. He explains that multiple U-boats, U-123, U-66, U-130, have been sighted or confirmed along the coast, some within sight of boardwalks and beach towns. Survivors have reported torpedoes fired so close to shore that witnesses could hear explosions from city streets. Roosevelt leans back, his eyes narrow. He taps the end of his cigarette holder against the desk. "This is what we feared the moment Germany declared war," he reportedly says, paraphrased from staff accounts. "But not what we expected so soon." The president gestures for Admiral Harold Stark, Chief of Naval Operations, who has been waiting in the adjoining room. Stark enters briskly, salutes, and begins outlining the scale of the crisis. Merchant ships are burning off Cape Hatteras. Oil slicks drift toward the Outer Banks. Tankers are fleeing without direction or escort. Radio calls are confused, some outdated codes, some not coded at all. Stark explains a bitter truth. The U.S. Navy is stretched thin. Destroyers are already committed to Atlantic convoys or redirected to the Pacific in response to Japan's rapid advance. Roosevelt listens in silence. Then he asks the question no one wants to answer. "How many ships have we lost?" Stark hesitates before replying. "More than a dozen in the past week, sir, possibly more. We don't yet have complete figures." Roosevelt lifts his chin slightly. "And how many U-boats?" Another hesitation. "None, Mr. President." The room goes still. Roosevelt absorbs this, his fingers interlacing atop the desk. He is known for his ability to mask emotion, yet now a flicker of something passes across his expression. Frustration, certainly, but also resolve. He finally speaks. "Gentlemen, the American coastline must not remain a shooting gallery." The phrasing is noted by several staff members later. It is sharp, vivid, almost uncharacteristically blunt for Roosevelt, but the moment demands bluntness. He issues his first order. "We begin coastal blackouts immediately." Knox and Stark exchange glances. They know this will anger governors, business owners, even ordinary citizens. But Roosevelt is firm. The lights must go out. Then a second order. Every available destroyer and aircraft must be reassigned to the Eastern Sea frontier. No exceptions. And finally, the most decisive. The U-boats are to be hunted, day and night. His tone carries no theatrics, no dramatics. Just determination. The president sets the file aside and reaches for another document, blank paper for directives. His hand trembles slightly as he lifts the pen, not from fear, but from the enormity of what must now be done. The war has arrived, and Roosevelt has made his decision. The hours following Roosevelt's orders move with a strange mix of urgency and confusion. Washington, D.C., normally a swarm of wartime telegrams, rapid briefings, and shuffling staff, now enters a higher gear. The machinery of a nation at war begins to pivot toward its own vulnerable coastline. Within the White House, Roosevelt's directives spread rapidly. Typed memos race through the Navy Department and War Department. Telephones ring nonstop. Officers hurry between offices clutching new orders stamped with the president's signature. But as commands travel outward, reality pushes back. Along the eastern seaboard, America is still living in peacetime habits. Coastal cities from Miami to Boston glow in bright cascades of neon signs, dance halls, boardwalk lamps, and seaside hotels. Holiday crowds flock to beaches even in winter. Radio stations broadcast just late into the night. Now suddenly, blackout wardens rush through city halls demanding that lights be dimmed. Many residents are baffled. Some are irritated. Others refuse outright. Local newspapers publish warnings. Enemy submarines confirmed off the coast. Lights may silhouette merchant ships, turn off unnecessary illumination. Still, change comes slowly. Meanwhile, the U.S. Navy scrambles into action. Destroyers are recalled from training exercises. Old World War I-era vessels, Corey, Lee, Erickson, are pressed into emergency service. Patrol aircraft fly crude search patterns along the shore, their crews inexperienced in anti-submarine warfare. Rear Admiral Adolphus Andrews, commander of the Eastern Sea frontier, receives Roosevelt's orders and immediately convenes his staff. He is blunt. "If we don't shield these shipping lanes, gentlemen, we'll lose half our tankers by spring." But Andrews faces enormous obstacles. Convoys are not yet organized. Available escorts are too few. Merchant crews lack training in zigzagging tactics, blackout procedures, or radio discipline. On the water, the situation worsens. January 15, 1942, another tanker goes down. January 17, 2 more burn off Cape Lookout. January 19, survivors from SS Francis Solman report seeing a submarine celebrate the sinking, crewmen laughing on the deck. American morale wavers. Coast Guard stations begin receiving frantic calls from fishermen who spot periscopes. Some towns claim to hear explosions offshore. Beaches fill with wreckage, oil drums, torn planks, life jackets washed ashore. Roosevelt remains updated hourly. His advisors deliver casualty figures, tonnage losses, and intercepted intelligence indicating that Dönitz is sending even more U-boats to exploit America's disarray. Yet Roosevelt refuses despair. In a conference with Andrews and Knox, he reportedly says, according to naval aides, "This is our trial by fire. We must learn faster than the enemy advances." Behind the scenes, new measures are drafted. Convoys will be mandatory. Blackouts enforced by law. British advisors invited to teach anti-submarine doctrine. Coastal radar networks accelerated. New shipyards pushed to maximum capacity. The United States, caught unprepared in the first blows of Operation Drumbeat, begins transforming its coastline into a fortified barrier. But these changes take time. And the U-boats are still out there, silent, waiting, relentless. In the weeks following Roosevelt's first reaction, America's coastline endures one of the most devastating maritime periods in its history. From January to July 1942, the numbers reach staggering proportions. Hundreds of ships sunk, thousands of sailors and merchant mariners lost, millions of barrels of oil burning across the Atlantic's surface. This period becomes known, quietly, and only after the war, as the American Blitz. But the story does not end with chaos. It ends with transformation. Roosevelt's early decisions, issued during that tense Oval Office meeting, set in motion a chain of reforms that reshape U.S. naval warfare. At first, progress is slow. Commanders debate policies, governors resist blackouts, and shipping companies protest the disruption of coastal trade. But the evidence becomes undeniable. Without drastic action, the East Coast will bleed ships faster than shipyards can replace them. Convoys, the backbone of Allied survival in the North Atlantic, become mandatory in American waters by May 1942. Though late, this change marks a turning point. Merchant vessels that once sailed alone, easy targets, now move in protected columns. The simple act of grouping ships reduces losses almost immediately. At the same time, Roosevelt pushes for integration of British expertise. Royal Navy officers, hardened by years of the Battle of the Atlantic, arrive in American command centers. They bring hard-earned lessons, sonar discipline, escort tactics, radio silence protocols, and aggressive patrolling methods. The cooperation deepens Allied strategic unity and accelerates U.S. proficiency. Ship production surges. Henry Kaiser's shipyards launch Liberty ships at unprecedented speed, one every few days, eventually one every few hours. America begins replacing losses faster than Germany can sink vessels. That industrial momentum, rooted in Roosevelt's earlier mobilization efforts, proves decisive. Meanwhile, Admiral Dönitz faces his own crisis. His U-boats, once confident hunters of glowing American silhouettes, now encounter new threats. Long-range patrol bombers from new coastal bases. Nighttime blackouts eliminating easy targets. Airships and radar-equipped blimps patrolling shipping lanes. Expanding sonar nets. Aggressive destroyer escorts trained in advanced tactics. By late summer 1942, the happy time for German U-boats is over. Losses mount. Morale fades. The Atlantic, once a battlefield favoring stealthy predators, begins favoring the Allied convoy system. Historians note a crucial irony. The same surprise that allowed U-boats to dominate early in 1942 ultimately exposes their limitations. They were effective only when opponents were unprepared. Once America mobilizes its industrial, naval, and scientific might, the submarine threat faces an enemy too large and too flexible to defeat. Yet the long-term impact stretches far beyond tactics. Roosevelt's resolve during the crisis cements the doctrine that the home front is a battlefield, not a sanctuary. The American public must adapt, lights off, vigilance up, sacrifices made. The nation's geographic security, long taken for granted, is replaced by a deeper understanding. Modern war respects no borders. For Roosevelt himself, the U-boat assault becomes a defining early test of his wartime leadership. The president who had guided America through the Great Depression now demonstrates he can guide it through the darkness offshore, a darkness filled with unseen threats, burning ships, and the constant uncertainty of the Atlantic. Modern historians understand what Roosevelt could only sense at the time. The decision he made that January morning helped prevent an even greater collapse of coastal shipping. Without swift action, America's ability to supply Britain, build armies, and project power across two oceans might have been crippled before the war truly began. Germany sought to strike fear into America's heart. Instead, it awakened the full force of a nation preparing for global conflict. By the end of 1942, the fires that once lit America's coastline have faded. The seas remain dangerous, but they are no longer the unguarded hunting grounds they were when Roosevelt first opened those grim reports. The coastline that once glowed with peacetime lights now stands as a shield of radar stations, convoy lanes, air patrols, and hardened defenders. Yet the memory of those early months lingers. It lingers in the oil-stained beaches of North Carolina, in the wrecks resting silently off the eastern seaboard, in the telegrams sent to families who never knew war could come so close. And it lingers in the Oval Office moment when Roosevelt, reading the first reports of sinking after sinking, understood that America could no longer rely on distance or oceans for protection. Modern war had erased geographic comfort. The home front and front line were now separated only by miles of dark water. The president's reaction, measured, decisive, immediate, remains a reminder of leadership under pressure. He faced a threat few Americans even believed was possible: enemy submarines prowling within sight of U.S. lighthouses. His response transformed an unprepared coastline into one of the most fortified maritime corridors in the world. History often remembers the great battles, Midway, D-Day, El Alamein, but the silent struggle off America's shores, the struggle Roosevelt confronted in those early days of 1942, shaped the outcome of the war just as profoundly. For in that moment of shock, the United States learned a hard truth. The ocean is not a wall, it is a doorway, and whoever controls it controls the future.